You've probably tried it before, being kind, understanding, patient. You thought that if you showed compassion, they'd finally see your heart and meet you halfway. But instead, your kindness got twisted, ignored, or used against you. It's frustrating, right? Because when you're dealing with someone who constantly manipulates, plays the victim, or makes everything your fault, being nice doesn't work. Not because kindness is wrong, but because it's being weaponized by the wrong person. Today, let's talk about why being nice won't change a narcissist and what actually will. You ever notice how no matter how kind you are, no matter how calm you try to stay, it never seems to make a difference with certain people? You could approach them with empathy, speak with patience, even go out of your way to make them feel understood, and somehow it still ends up being your fault. That's because to a narcissist, kindness isn't kindness, it's opportunity. They interpret it as permission, permission to push, to test, to control. When you're nice, they're not thinking, wow, this person really cares. They're thinking, perfect, I can use that. The truth is, narcissists don't view relationships the way you do. You see a connection, they see a transaction. Every word, every gesture, every moment of grace becomes a tool they can use to maintain dominance. When you forgive them too easily, they call it weakness. When you try to understand their side, they twist it into justification for their behavior. And when you stay quiet to keep the peace, they read it as acceptance. It's not that your kindness is wrong. It's that they're not capable of receiving it the way it's meant. You're speaking the language of empathy, but they only hear control, power, and self-interest. A narcissist's goal isn't harmony, it's hierarchy. They have to be on top. So when you approach them with kindness, they don't feel safe. They feel superior. They take that warmth and use it to reinforce their own ego. They'll smile, act appreciative, and in the next moment, turn around and make you question your sanity. That's how the cycle works. You give compassion, they take control. You show patience, they show manipulation. It's a loop that drains you emotionally, slowly teaching you that being good doesn't always bring out the good in others. What makes this so confusing is that most kind-hearted people believe love can fix everything. You think if you're just a little more patient, a little more forgiving, they'll finally get it. You wait for that moment when they realize how much you care. But that moment never comes because narcissists don't learn through kindness. They learn through consequence. You can't appeal to their heart because they've built walls around it. Their focus isn't on emotional connection. It's on maintaining control. And as long as kindness keeps them in control, they'll keep taking advantage of it. That's why being nice doesn't change them. It feeds them. It gives them the supply they need to keep the cycle going. They rely on your empathy to reset the stage after every fight. They know you'll come back, apologize, try to make things right. And the more you do, the more they tighten their grip. The dynamic only shifts when you stop giving what they're using against you. When you stop being nice and start being neutral. Neutral isn't cold, it's controlled. It's you saying, I see what you're doing, but I'm not playing that game anymore. Once you stop reacting with kindness, they didn't earn, you take away their favorite weapon, your willingness to understand. Narcissists crave emotional responses. They want your attention, whether it's positive or negative. But when you respond with calm indifference instead of care, they lose their power. They'll test you harder at first, push more, provoke more, because they're not used to losing control. But eventually, the pattern breaks. You start realizing that you can still be kind, but you don't have to be accessible. You can still be good-hearted without being manipulated. Kindness is a strength, but only when it's paired with awareness. When you know who you're dealing with, you stop confusing decency with duty. You stop giving people chances they haven't earned, and that's the shift that changes everything. Because being nice might not change a narcissist, but recognizing how they use your niceness, that's where your power begins. One of the biggest traps people fall into when dealing with a narcissist is the constant need to explain. You think if you can just get them to understand your point of view, they'll see how much sense you're making. You replay conversations in your head, trying to figure out how to phrase things differently next time, hoping they'll finally listen. But here's the truth. Narcissists don't want understanding. They want control. Every explanation you give them is fuel. It's more material for them to twist, more words to use against you, more proof in their mind that they've got you exactly where they want you, emotionally invested and desperate to be heard. When you explain yourself to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you, you're not communicating. You're performing. You're dancing for validation that's never coming. Narcissists thrive on that chase. They'll bait you with accusations, with half-truths, with guilt trips, because they know you'll take the bait. They know you'll defend yourself, clarify, apologize over and over again just to clear the air. But what you don't realize is that they're not trying to clear anything. They're trying to keep the air cloudy because confusion keeps you compliant. If you're too busy trying to make them see your side, you'll never have time to see what they're really doing. You can't win a conversation with someone who changes the rules every time you start making sense. Narcissists will interrupt, shift blame, and flip every word you say until you start doubting yourself. They'll make you feel guilty for being upset, selfish for setting boundaries, and overreactive for simply standing your ground. The moment you start defending yourself, you've already lost control of the conversation. They don't need to prove you wrong. They just need to keep you talking because every minute you're explaining yourself is another minute they're running the show. The real change begins when you stop explaining, when you stop needing them to understand, when you stop defending what you know to be true. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Calmness isn't avoidance, it's power. You can't control how they twist your words, but you can control whether or not you give them the chance to. Instead of explaining, you state. You don't say, I didn't mean it like that. You say, that's not what happened. You don't say, I'm sorry you feel that way. You say, that's your interpretation. You don't try to convince them. You simply stop engaging in the game. This shift throws narcissists off balance because they depend on your emotional engagement. When you don't give it, the power dynamic changes. They'll push harder at first, accuse you of being cold, distant, or dismissive, anything to provoke a reaction. But your strength lies in consistency. No defense, no long explanations, no emotional back and forth. You're not shutting down, you're stepping out. You're refusing to play the role they've scripted for you, the one where you constantly chase their approval and understanding. And once you stop explaining, they lose their favorite form of control, confusion. Every time you explain yourself to a narcissist, you're handing them information. You're showing them what triggers you, what matters to you, what you'll fight to protect. They store that information like ammunition. So when you stop explaining, you become unpredictable. They can't manipulate what they can't read. They start realizing that their old tactics, guilt, shame, deflection, no longer land the same way. That silence you're giving them, it speaks louder than any justification ever could. Because silence says, you no longer have access to my energy. It's calm, it's controlled, and it's powerful in a way that words can't match. When you finally stop explaining, you start reclaiming your peace. You stop rehearsing arguments in your mind and start living in reality instead of reaction. The goal was never to make them understand you. It was to make yourself free. You realize that your worth isn't determined by whether someone gets you, and your truth doesn't need to be defended to someone who's made a habit of denying it. That's where real change begins. Not in trying to convince them, but in choosing not to be convinced by them. There comes a moment when you realize that being endlessly kind isn't creating peace. It's creating permission. You've apologized when you weren't wrong, stayed quiet when you should have spoken, and given chance after chance to someone who only takes advantage of your patience. You tell yourself you're being the bigger person, but deep down, you feel smaller every time. That's because kindness without boundaries doesn't earn you respect. It drains it. Narcissists don't learn from your generosity. They learn from what you allow. And as long as your kindness outweighs your limits, they'll keep crossing lines just to see how far you'll bend before you break. Boundaries are uncomfortable because they force you to confront your fear of being disliked. You worry that saying no will make you seem cold or heartless, but the truth is, boundaries are not walls, they're doors with locks. You decide who comes in, how long they stay, and under what conditions. You don't set boundaries to punish anyone, you set them to protect your peace. And the people who truly care about you will respect them. The ones who don't were never there for the right reasons. Narcissists hate boundaries because they can't manipulate what they can't access. The moment you draw a line, they lose control, and that loss feels like rejection to them, which is why they'll fight so hard against it. When you start enforcing boundaries, don't expect applause, expect pushback. Narcissists will call you selfish, dramatic, or ungrateful. They'll make you feel guilty for simply protecting your energy. They'll twist your boundary into an attack and say you've changed, and you have. You've stopped giving them the version of you they could control. That's what boundaries do. They strip away the illusion that kindness means endless tolerance. They remind people that your compassion has limits, and those limits are not up for negotiation. It's not about being mean, it's about being clear. You can still care about someone and not allow them to mistreat you. You can still be kind without being controlled. The hardest part about setting boundaries with a narcissist is staying consistent. They'll test every line you draw, looking for weak spots. They'll apologize one day, guilt trip you the next, and act like nothing happened the day after that. It's a cycle designed to make you question your own limits. But your job isn't to convince them to respect your boundary, it's to enforce it, even when they don't. You don't need to explain it, justify it, or debate it. You simply follow through. Every time you keep a boundary firm, you teach them that your peace is not negotiable. And slowly, you start retraining yourself to respond from strength instead of fear. Boundaries are the language of self-respect. They say, I won't let you treat me like that without needing to raise your voice. They don't require anger, only clarity. The reason they're so powerful with narcissists is because narcissists operate on control. When you set a boundary and stand by it, you're no longer feeding their control. You're taking it back. That quiet confidence, that ability to walk away instead of react, it disarms them because they can't manipulate silence and they can't guilt trip someone who's done explaining. The less you argue about your boundaries, the more solid they become. You stop needing to prove your point and start proving your peace. Think of boundaries as emotional armor. They don't make you invincible, but they keep you safe enough to stay strong. When you know where your lines are, you stop living in reaction mode. You stop feeling anxious about how they'll respond and start focusing on how you will. You begin to see that your job isn't to fix their behavior. It's to protect your own well-being. And every time you honor that, you send a clear message, not through words, but through action. I'm not available for this kind of chaos anymore. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's powerful enough to shift the entire dynamic. Kindness can be misunderstood, but boundaries can't. They don't need to be explained, defended, or softened to make others comfortable. When you start pairing your kindness with boundaries, something incredible happens. You stop attracting people who take and start attracting people who respect. You learn that peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you create. And you finally understand that saying no doesn't make you unkind. It makes you free. When you're dealing with a narcissist, every reaction you give is a form of currency. They don't just want your attention, they feed on your emotional energy. The sighs, the frustration, the tears, even the effort you put into proving your point, all of it fuels their sense of control. The more you react, the more powerful they feel. That's why emotional detachment isn't about being cold-hearted. It's about reclaiming your peace. It's learning to stop handing over your emotional responses like free fuel. It's realizing that you can't stop their behavior, but you can stop feeding it. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you start caring more about yourself than the chaos they create. At first, detachment feels unnatural because you've been conditioned to respond. You're used to defending, fixing, or explaining. You think that if you just express yourself better, they'll finally understand. But the narcissist isn't looking for understanding. They're looking for reaction. Every word you say gives them more room to twist the story. So when you stop reacting, it confuses them. They don't know what to do with your calm. They poke, provoke, and push just to get a rise out of you because your emotions have always been their remote control. When you stop reacting, it's like you took the batteries out. Suddenly, they're pressing buttons and nothing's happening. That silence, that calm energy, that's what makes them lose control. Emotional detachment doesn't happen overnight. It's a discipline. It's choosing silence instead of arguments, logic instead of emotion, and calmness instead of chaos. It's not that you stop feeling, it's that you stop performing those feelings for someone who weaponizes them. You still feel angry, disappointed, or hurt, but you no longer show it where it can be used against you. You learn to pause before you respond, to breathe before you speak, and to walk away before you get dragged into another cycle. The goal isn't to win the fight, it's to refuse to participate in it, because narcissists can't win if you're not playing. There's a quiet power in not reacting. It's the kind of strength that doesn't shout, it just holds its ground. When a narcissist realizes that they can't pull you into their emotional tornado anymore, they lose interest. They can't feed on your calm. But here's the tricky part. They'll test it. They'll say things designed to trigger you. They'll bring up the past, twist your words, or act like they don't care at all just to see if you still do. That's when you hold the line. You remind yourself that detachment isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about choosing what deserves your energy. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. When you stay emotionally detached, you stop living reactively. You stop letting their moods dictate your peace. You begin to see their patterns clearly, almost like you're watching a movie instead of living in it. You notice the manipulation without falling into it. You recognize the guilt trips, the blame shifts, the silent treatments, and instead of reacting, you just observe. That's when you realize how much control you actually have. You're no longer tangled in their drama. You're simply aware of it. And that awareness gives you a calm confidence that no argument can shake. Detachment doesn't mean disconnecting from reality. It means grounding yourself in it. It means recognizing that their behavior isn't about you. It's about their own emptiness, their own need for validation. You stop taking things personally. You stop trying to fix what's broken in them. You start focusing on what's healthy for you. It's a shift from emotional dependence to emotional independence. And the beautiful part is, once you master that calm, they can't take it from you because it's not built on their approval or reaction. It's built on your own inner strength. The more detached you become, the more peaceful your world feels. Things that once sent you spiraling don't even register the same way anymore. You stop explaining, stop defending, and stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never intended to see it. That's when you start to feel free, not because they changed, but because you did. Detachment gives you clarity, and with clarity comes power. You finally realize that you don't need to win with words or emotions. You win by refusing to play their game at all. The hardest truth to accept when dealing with a narcissist is that nothing you say, do, or feel will ever make them see things differently. You could bend over backward, show endless patience, or sacrifice your peace trying to help them understand, and it still wouldn't make a difference. That's because narcissists don't change from external influence. They change only when something threatens their control, and even then, it's rarely genuine. You can't teach empathy to someone who doesn't want to feel it. So the real change begins not with them, but with you. It starts the moment you stop trying to fix the unfixable and redirect that effort toward your own healing. Because the only power you truly have is over your own responses. When you stop trying to change them, you take your power back. It's like stepping out of a storm you've been standing in for too long. You start realizing how much energy you've spent trying to manage their moods, predict their reactions, and maintain peace that was never real. The exhaustion you've been feeling isn't from loving too much. It's from over-functioning in a relationship that runs on imbalance. Once you focus on changing yourself, your mindset shifts from survival to clarity. You begin asking different questions, not why are they doing this, but why am I still tolerating it? That's when growth begins, not from changing them, but from understanding yourself better. You learn that detachment isn't abandonment, it's alignment. It's choosing to live in truth instead of illusion. You stop waiting for apologies that never come and validation that was never real. You stop chasing closure from someone who benefits from keeping you confused. And in that stillness, you find strength you didn't know you had. You realize that your peace doesn't depend on their cooperation. You don't need them to understand your boundaries for them to exist. You don't need them to respect you for you to stand firm. Change starts when you finally decide that your emotional well-being is worth protecting, even if that means walking away from what hurts. When you shift the focus to yourself, everything starts to look different. You begin to see how much of your energy was invested in trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Respect, honesty, love. You start to rebuild your confidence piece by piece by setting limits and keeping them. You start making choices that come from peace, not fear. You stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. The moment you realize that you don't owe anyone constant forgiveness for repeated harm, you begin to heal. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming grounded. You're not changing for them. You're changing for you. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean you ignore the pain. It means you process it differently. You stop using it as a reason to chase them and start using it as motivation to grow. You learn from the patterns, from the red flags you once ignored, and from the times you stayed when you should have walked away. Self-awareness becomes your strongest shield. You start to see how every reaction, every attempt to fix them was really about your own need for closure. But once you give that closure to yourself, they lose their power. They can no longer pull you into the same emotional loops because you've outgrown the game. The more you focus on yourself, the more their behavior stops affecting you. What used to trigger anger now triggers understanding. What used to break you now builds you. You start viewing their manipulation as evidence of who they are, not a reflection of who you are. That's what real change looks like. When their chaos no longer has the ability to control your calm. You start living by your own standards again, making decisions from a place of confidence instead of fear. You stop reacting to their energy and start protecting your own. And over time, that emotional distance creates peace that no one can take from you. Change doesn't come from trying to wake someone else up. It comes from waking yourself up. You stop giving the narcissist center stage in your life and start reclaiming your own story.